Do you remember what you wanted to be when you were 9? Maybe an astronaut, maybe a professional athlete, maybe a singer, a firefighter, a doctor, or maybe something completely impossible, something you couldn't even explain. Now think about this. What are you at 25? Are you really the person you imagined you would become? Did you actually become the person you saw in your childhood dreams? Or somewhere between school, work, bills, expectations, and growing up? Did you quietly lose sight of that person? Because here's something strange. At 9 years old, you were rich. Not because you had money. You probably had almost none. You were rich because you had time. You had imagination. You had curiosity. And most importantly, you had the feeling that your entire life was still waiting for you. A Saturday afternoon felt endless. Summer vacation felt like another universe. You could spend 3 hours outside doing absolutely nothing. And somehow, it felt like the most important thing in the world. You could turn a cardboard box into a spaceship, a blanket into a castle, a backyard into an alien planet. And you didn't need anyone to tell you that your imagination mattered. You already knew. You didn't wake up thinking, how productive am I going to be today? You didn't feel guilty for resting. You didn't check the clock every 10 minutes. You didn't wonder whether you were falling behind. You simply woke up and lived. And maybe that's the part we've forgotten. At 9, you weren't trying to build a life. You were experiencing one. You could dream about becoming anything, because nobody had taught you to be afraid of impossible things yet. You didn't ask how much money an astronaut made. You didn't calculate the odds of becoming famous. You didn't wonder whether your dream was realistic. You just said, I want to be that. And somehow, that was enough. Think about how powerful that is. You had almost nothing, but the future felt infinite. Today, we might have more possessions, better phones, more information, more opportunities, maybe even more money. But somehow, the future can feel smaller. Because at 25, you start learning something childhood never prepared you for. Every choice closes another door. Every year comes with more responsibility. And slowly, the question changes. When you were 9, you asked, what could I become? At 25, you start asking, what can I realistically afford to become? And that's where something beautiful begins to disappear. Not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly, one ordinary day at a time. And you might not even notice it happening, until one morning, you wake up and realize the child who once believed anything was possible has become an adult who is just trying to make it through Friday. And the terrifying part? You may not have lost your dream. You may have simply become too tired to remember it. And that's where the story really begins. Maybe you remember the exact moment adulthood started feeling different. Not the day you turned 18. Not the day you graduated. Not even the day you got your first job. It was probably much quieter than that. Maybe it happened on an ordinary Monday morning. Your alarm went off. You looked at the ceiling, and for a few seconds, you didn't want to get up. Not because you were lazy, because you were tired. You got ready. You checked your phone. You went to work. You answered emails. You watched the clock. You came home. You ate something. You opened your phone again. Maybe you watched a show. Maybe you scrolled for an hour without remembering a single thing you saw. And then, you went to sleep, only to do it all again tomorrow. And eventually, you stop asking whether you're happy. You start asking whether you're functioning. Can I pay my bills? Can I make rent? Can I keep this job? Can I keep up with everyone? Can I survive another week? And somehow, survival starts looking like success. This is the strange poverty of adulthood. You can have a paycheck and still feel poor. You can have a nice apartment and still feel homeless inside yourself. You can have hundreds of contacts and still feel completely alone. You can have unlimited entertainment and still feel bored. And you can have more freedom than you had at 9, while feeling like you have less freedom than ever. Because your time doesn't feel like yours anymore. Your calendar owns it. Your job owns it. Your responsibilities own it. And sometimes, even your phone owns the tiny pieces that are left. At 9, you could spend an entire afternoon staring at ants. At 25, you can barely sit still for 5 minutes without feeling like you should be doing something productive. That's the trap. We've been taught to measure our lives by output. How much did you accomplish? How much did you earn? How successful are you? How attractive are you? How many people know your name? How far ahead are you? But nobody asks the question that might actually matter. Are you still becoming the person you wanted to be? Because somewhere along the way, your dreams became goals. Your goals became responsibilities. And your responsibilities became your entire identity. You stopped saying, I want to make music. You started saying, maybe someday. You stopped saying, I want to travel the world. You started saying, when I have enough money. You stopped saying, I want to build something of my own. And eventually, you stopped saying it altogether. Not because the dream died, because you did something more subtle. You became practical. And practicality isn't evil. We need money. We need jobs. We need responsibilities. We need stability. But there's a dangerous moment when being responsible turns into abandoning yourself. When every decision is based on what makes sense, you eventually forget what makes you feel alive. And then one day, you see an old photograph of yourself. 9 years old. Messy hair. Big smile. Maybe missing a tooth. Standing there, completely unaware of how complicated life is about to become. And you look at that kid, and something inside you hurts. Because they believed you would become someone incredible. And you wonder, what happened to us? But maybe that's the wrong question. Because maybe nothing happened to you. Maybe you're still in there, buried underneath the deadlines, the anxiety, the routines, the expectations, waiting for you to remember. And maybe the person you thought you lost was never actually gone. Maybe they were just waiting for you to come back. Maybe the goal isn't to become 9 years old again. You can't. And honestly, you shouldn't. That child didn't know what you know now. They didn't know about heartbreak, bills, failure, rejection, responsibility. They didn't understand how difficult life could become. But they knew something you've probably forgotten. They knew how to be curious. They knew how to play. They knew how to imagine without permission. And maybe that's what you need to bring back. Not the childhood, the way you saw the world. Because growing up was never supposed to mean becoming numb. It was supposed to mean becoming capable, without losing your sense of wonder. You don't have to quit your job tomorrow. You don't have to sell everything you own. You don't have to disappear into the mountains and reinvent yourself. Sometimes, reclaiming yourself begins with something much smaller. Turn your phone off. Go outside. Make something. Write something nobody asked you to write. Draw badly. Play music. Read something that has nothing to do with your career. Take a walk without listening to anything. Sit somewhere and let your mind wander. At first, it might feel pointless, because you've been trained to believe that everything needs to produce something. But that's exactly why it matters. You are allowed to do things that don't make you money. You are allowed to have interests that don't become businesses. You are allowed to rest without earning it first. You are allowed to dream without immediately turning the dream into a 5-year plan. And Maybe you should ask yourself the question you haven't asked in years. If nobody could judge me, what would I want? Not what would make your parents proud. Not what would impress your friends. Not what would look good on Instagram. Not what would make the most money. What would you want? Because sometimes the life you're exhausted from isn't even the life you chose. It's the life you slowly accepted, one expectation at a time, one compromise at a time, one, maybe later, at a time. And here's the beautiful thing. 25 isn't the end. It's not even close. You are not late. You are not finished. You are not the person you are going to be forever. You still have decades of mornings you've never experienced, cities you've never seen, people you've never met, things you've never created, versions of yourself you've never discovered. The child inside you isn't asking you to go backward. They're asking you to remember why you moved forward in the first place. Maybe you wanted to become an astronaut, but what you really wanted was to explore. Maybe you wanted to become famous, but what you really wanted was to be seen. Maybe you wanted to become rich, but what you really wanted was freedom. Maybe you wanted to become a superhero because you wanted to feel powerful enough to protect the people you loved. Your childhood dreams were never always about the job. They were clues. Clues about what your soul valued before the world taught you what was valuable. And maybe that's why looking back hurts. Because somewhere inside those old dreams, there was a version of you that felt completely alive. So no, you weren't actually rich at 9 and poor at 25. You were rich in something money can't buy. Attention, imagination, time, possibility, and adulthood didn't necessarily steal those things from you. You slowly traded them away for things you were told you needed. But anything you can trade away, you can begin to reclaim. Maybe not all at once, maybe not perfectly, but little by little, one morning, one decision, one forgotten dream, one honest question at a time. So tonight, before you go to sleep, ask yourself something. Close your eyes and imagine yourself at 9 years old. Look at that kid. Really look at them. Then ask, what did you believe my life was going to become? And listen, maybe, for the first time in years, you'll hear an answer. You weren't poor at 25. You were just beginning to forget how rich you already were. And maybe growing up isn't about leaving that child behind. Maybe it's about finally becoming the adult that child believed you could be.